Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Land Development Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Glick, and we have another industry news episode for you today. And joining me, as always, on these episodes is Charles Covey. Charles, how's it going?
Hey, good to be here.
Yes, sir. And we're going to dig right into three different articles. If this is your first time joining, we put all of the articles that we cover on this show down in the description below. So whether you're on YouTube watching us, you can follow along on the screen here. But otherwise, if you're listening in, look down in the description of the episode and you'll see all the links to the various articles that we are about to discuss here. So, with that said, let's go ahead and jump into our first article. Article number one comes to us from the National Association of Home Builders. Headline reads, single family output up across all regions while multifamily production is down. Reading from this article, a lack of resale homes and pent up demand more than offset high mortgage rates and contributed to solid single family permit growth across nearly all geographic regions in the second quarter. However, multifamily construction permit activity continued its slide downward across the board to start 2024. Meanwhile, single family and multifamily construction both exhibited strong growth in second home markets over the past decade, according to the latest findings from the National Association of Home Builders Home Building Geography Index for the second quarter of 2024. Continuing on in this article, despite the elevated interest rate environment, single family construction continues to move along at a better pace than 2023 and has been led by a rebound in construction activity in higher density areas, said NAHB Chairman Carl Harris, a custom builder from Wichita, Kansas. Multifamily construction continues to slow as builders deal with higher rates, a shortage of workers, and supply chain concerns for some building materials. So when I came across this article, I feel like it's more of a consistent theme that we've been seeing as far as we have a shortage of single family. Single family continues to increase right now, and on the multifamily side, it feels like over the last 3 years since COVID, there's been a lot of multifamily development. And I know it doesn't necessarily say in this article that there's saturation or anything like that. It talks more about higher rates and shortage of workers and supply chain concerns, not necessarily saturation. I continue to see quite a bit of multifamily development going on where I'm at here in Des Moines, Iowa. But there's a lot more single family development that continues to go on. Quite a few lots that you see out there and everything. So this doesn't necessarily surprise me. It just more I guess shows like what we've been seeing or continue to see and everything. Not sure if you have any thoughts on this, Charles.
Yeah, there's a little bit of hidden data here that we don't get contextually to see based on what they're saying. So a couple of hidden factors I think are notable, and let's see how they play out. So you're noticing that home building is continuing to go, but there's some nuance to that. So the regional and larger builders, so all the national builders and some of the regional builders have been the ones spending most of the time and effort in this increase. And the reason is they have better access, cheaper access to capital. The smaller regional and the local builders, they're having a tougher time, right? They can't get lots developed. They can't move at the same speed they would wish to because their borrowing costs are pretty high, and that's problematic. So we are seeing market share continue to be gobbled up by the national builders, and so we're in my view, that's probably not great because now we're taking away from local economies and we're putting that money into a Fortune 500 company, a top 5, top 10 builder. So I don't love that scenario. I'm really curious to see if some of those local and smaller regional builders can pull back some of their market share as the rate environment trickles down. I don't know. That's one that I'm really interested to see. I hope that they can, but some of those guys are still struggling. Cost of capital is hurting them, and of course they were notating the multifamily starts, of course, are down, and that's it's purely a cost of capital thing in most cases. And trending rents are trending down a little bit in some of the markets that were overbuilt. Still plenty of demand, though they're still leasing up. So I think we'll see that pick back up in a couple of years. But I think it's a 24-month lull for multifamily.
Nice. Well, cool. Let's anything else on this one? Otherwise, we'll just move right along to our second article for this episode.
Yeah, this is a lot of stuff that we talk about on a regular basis, but it's just like another example of the significance of the problem.
Yep. All right, next one here comes to us from Fox Business. This is actually a video that we're going to watch if you're watching with us, or you're going to listen to here on if you're listening on the podcast. The headline of this reads, "We need more incentives for housing production." Jim Tobin is on to be interviewed here. So I'm going to go ahead and flip over and play this. It's about a 4-minute clip, and then we will react to what is covered in this video.
NAHB CEO Jim Tobin joins me now to talk more about that. Jim, thanks very much for being here this weekend. We so appreciate your time. Give us your take on these proposals from Kamala Harris, and also touching on what your chairman said, and that is the onerous regulations.
Yeah, well, first, we're pleased to see both political candidates, former President Trump and Vice President Harris, talk about housing and, more importantly, adding more supply. The only way we're going to combat housing affordability or inaffordability in this country is to build more housing units. So glad to see that. I really think the challenge, of course, is government regulation. 25% of the cost of a single family home, almost 44% of the cost of a multifamily unit is embedded in regulation across all levels of government. She had a great opportunity to talk about lowering the federal bill when it comes to regulations, and she didn't do that, especially when we've seen this administration throw more regulations on top of housing that are going to raise the cost.
So let me get your take on that, because, I mean, she is talking about this $25,000 help for people who are first-time home buyers. How significant is that, Jim?
First, for a first-time home buyer, the hardest thing for them to do is to come up with a down payment. So down payment assistance is an important piece. However, it's going to be really, really expensive. It's going to have to get through Congress. And more importantly, we don't need any more demand side incentives. We need more incentives for production. And that's why we like her idea about a tax credit to build for first-time home buyers. But the devils are in the details. We haven't seen much of that. But again, it's about building, not about demand. Demand is there as interest rates begin to fall over the course of the fourth quarter of this year and into next year. Demand's going to come roaring back. And that's when the nation's home builders need to be able to respond by building more housing.
Well, let me get your take on the regulatory side of things. It feels like she's going to be amping up regulations, as President Trump says he's going to deregulate. How onerous are those regulations? Tell me what the regulations are that are so onerous.
Sure, I'll give you three. And to President Trump's credit, we saw what the next 4 years are going to look like by looking back at his first 4 years. A lower regulatory environment, higher economic growth, and housing boomed under President Trump. What we've seen over the last 3.5 years with President Biden are regulations that are impacting the cost of housing in America. I'll give you my favorite one, just announced about 2 months ago. It's going to add between $18,000 and $30,000 to the cost of a new single-family home. Starting in about a year from now, any FHA, VA, or USDA borrower that uses government funding or government financing for a new home, those homes are going to have to meet the latest energy code. We're going to talking about adding, again, $20,000 to $30,000 in the cost of a home for that regulation alone. It's going to do away with states' rights, where states and localities, they establish their energy codes. It's really a pathway to a national energy code in this country. And it's going to add tens of thousands of dollars to a home for the exact segment of the population they're trying to help. Second, Kamala Harris announced that she was going to support President Biden's rent cap proposal just about a month ago. It wasn't in her plan she announced last week, but seriously, she's talking about rent caps. This goes along the lines with food caps and government price controls. So we really oppose that. And I'll just even this past week, we saw the U.S. Commerce Department announce they're doubling the tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber, which is a major building component and building material supply chain. So we're talking about doubling the cost on the tariffs when it comes to a major home component.
These are really important points that you raised. Thank you so much for that, Jim. Good to see you. Thanks very much.
All right. So, kind of a couple of the things that stood out to me in, I guess, in that clip is I don't think I've ever hid my my political leanings or anything like that on this show, but I think it's interesting to see, as he mentioned during that interview there, the demand side versus supply side. And, you know, political candidates will, a lot of times, to get votes, they're going to, hype up certain things that are on the demand side to give people money in order to, be able to afford a down payment. But it definitely does feel like we need more supply side, like he just said, more incentives for the actual builders to be able to build and to produce the units that we don't have. We're obviously short units, so it's not going to, we're solving, I feel like, the wrong problem by going down that path. So anyway, that was kind of the first thing that really stuck out to me in that video.
Yeah, the element here is demand side incentives really aren't something that we need. That tends to be a democratic approach, and kind of to your point, I follow more conservative leaning, especially fiscally conservative, and I don't think that's the way to go. The demand is there. We need to make it easier for developers and builders to put units on the ground. And so the thing that he mentioned there about 24% of the cost burden, being in the regulations and the entitlement process, and that's true. That's factual in every market that I know of, and in some cases it might be even higher than that. So creating a scenario to make it simpler, easier, make it a super highway path from conceptualization to construction starting, and just really ease up on the entitlement bureaucracy that creates a lot of issues and a lot of added costs. That's really where the effective change would be, and that would be the most bang for the buck too. So again, I talked about before having a housing czar or some other type of department that would work with states to really go after regulations that are unnecessary and red tape that is unnecessary and slowing down the process. Some of the states are able to do this state by state. Texas is working on it. We got some new stuff coming in Texas that I think will be really fascinating. We'll talk about later. But it's going to be tough to get that done on a national level without somebody overseeing it. Another thing that I thought that they was interesting, he was kind of against the Canadian lumber tariffs, and I disagree there. I'm more of a nationalist in that regard. I think that we have got a tremendous amount of timber here in the U.S., and generally it's not getting utilized well. We've got a lot of timber sitting that could be utilized, and even if lumber goes up a little bit, let's find some ways to cut costs in other places through through some of the red tape that we can reduce. Let's work on that element, pull costs down there. Even if we have a percent or two increase in lumber to keep it domestic, I still think that that's a win for the American people to keep lumber production in the U.S. So we can scale up lumber production in the U.S. That is possible. We definitely have the timber. So I disagree with him on that point.
Yeah. Do you remember any political season that we've had up to this point where housing has been such a big topic? Feels like this is
Not
different.
not in my history, and you and I were talking about earlier. So I worked in Washington D.C. on the Hill for a little while, and got to see the process. I don't remember housing being as big of a hot button as it is right now, at least in my short political lifestyle over, let's say, the last 20 years. Maybe before that, maybe in my parents' time, there was some particular housing centric language, but not that I've heard of. So yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. I think this is, and we called this, didn't we? Like we said 2 or 3 months ago, hey, this is going to be a big topic for the next, for through the election and then into the next administration for sure. It's just it's too big of a problem for it to get overlooked at this point. So the monster's gotten too big and it's rearing its ugly head, and somebody's going to have to deal with it.
Yeah. So obviously we're only September, October, November. So we're only 2 months away from the election. So I'm sure this is going to continue to be a hot topic that continues to be brought up by both of the, political parties that are, have the best chance of actually winning. And so, yeah, it's something we'll keep an eye on and see if there's anything that changes. I think as he said, I think we know for the most part kind of where both political candidates stand and which direction they will go if they are to get into office. So, I think it's important for everybody listening in to make sure that you're following this and reading beyond the headline and understanding like what all of this means for our industry and how it is going to impact us and everything. So, anything else you want to add on this one?
Yeah, kind of to what you're saying, both sides have got a platform regarding housing. So I think it's good for housing either way. Those of us that are in the industry, we're going to benefit regardless of who's in power. But I think the methodology that they're going to use is going to be different. And so what's that like over time? I think in the short term, both methodologies can create momentum and create dollars flowing back to all of us who participate in that industry. But I think long term, if we're using tax dollars to subsidize something versus just making the process cheaper and easier to execute. I think how that plays out over the next decade or two and what that does to a deficit and how that burdens a future generation with taxes, like that whole thing plays out differently. So bigger picture, there's some kind of things that would vary administration to administration. But regardless of how you look at it, housing will have a great 2025. I think that's inevitable.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump on to the third and final headline here. So, this article comes to us from The Real Deal, Real Estate News. The headline reads Texas needs hundreds of thousands of homes to keep up with growth. Onto the subheadline Housing shortage causing unaffordability across Texas. DFW median home prices increased almost 50% between 2020 and last year. So, reading from the article, Texas needs to build hundreds of thousands of new homes if it wants to keep up with demand and population growth. The state leads the nation with the highest number of building permits for privately owned housing units since 2008, but the pace of new construction still lags behind the state's rapid population growth, particularly in the major metropolitan areas, the Dallas Morning News first reported, citing the Texas Comptroller's Office. Continuing on here, estimates show Texas needed an additional 306,000 homes as of last year to make any significant impact on demand, according to Up for Growth, a nonprofit organization that focuses on housing policy. A shortage of supply, particularly for those in lower income brackets, has led to rising prices and limited housing options. And the last slide here, the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area is among the hardest hit by this housing shortage. The region, which led all U.S. metro areas in population growth from 2020 to 2023, has seen median home prices increase by more than 40% in recent years, according to Texas A&M University's Texas Real Estate Research Center. In January 2020, the median price of a home in DFW was just over $267,000. Today, that figure has soared past $400,000. So I'm actually going to let you take the first pass on this one because you live down there, you live in this and live and breathe it. So interested to get your thoughts on what's going on down there in DFW.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time studying these numbers, and this is a big element to the build to rent uprising that we're seeing. Like build to rent as an asset class is emerging, and it is picking up steam every single day, partly because of this reason, because the cost of owning a home is going up so dramatically. And there's a few reasons I've talked about before how I think home sizes are too large, and there's some other components here. A big chunk of this, though, is land price is a huge element to this, right? So you look at some of the key lumber and concrete; those have all gone up, but land price has gone up notably, and that's a huge element. Part of the reason the land price is higher is the entitlement cost and all the time that it takes to get that done, all the risk that's involved. So that 25% that's built into a project just because of the entitlement costs that it takes to get the land in order, that's a big element here, and that's a big chunk of what this increase is that you're seeing. So we're living it and breathing it here in DFW, and it shouldn't take $400,000 to get a starter home. That seems troubling to me. And in fact, I was just at a business dinner last night, and this came up in conversation, and it's coming up in conversation a lot. Even to people that aren't buying a starter home, they just realize that, hey, this is a big societal issue. We're gonna have to find a solution to this. We need something to give because what happens when people can't afford to live? So, this is definitely pushing people towards rentals, and some of that is okay. But I think in general, we don't want to get away from the American dream of owning a home. I think that's a huge element that separates us from many other societies across the globe, that makes us unique and special. The American dream is one of the more American things that we have. And you look at other cultures, they just don't cherish that in the same way. And it's something that makes us really unique and special. And I think it drives people for an entire career to kind of focus on that element of having their own little piece of paradise. So we need to find ways to do that. And, we're talking about it almost every week, different solutions.
Yeah. I'm curious from your standpoint. So we hear from the political candidates at the federal level as to what their plans are for housing. How much do you think how much impact do you think they will have on this particular problem versus more of the state and local levels of being able to address this? Is it a combination of all of them that needs to happen, or is it more important in one area versus the others, do you think?
What it appears is that the red states are doing a better job of managing this problem. The blue states seem to be struggling, and that probably goes back to kind of the methodology that they tend to solve things with is a little bit different. And the methodology of allowing things to get built, allowing things to happen, making it easier for money to flow toward a project from the developer side versus from the demand side. That seems to be the solution in the red states. Florida's removed their zoning. Texas is working on a bunch of laws. We got some new stuff coming. Maybe there's some zoning stuff that's rescinded in this next session. So I think red states are kind of working this on their own. Blue states are going to struggle. It would move a lot faster to get a consistent set of verbiage, a consistent directive on the federal level. But ultimately, yes, it's a states thing, and it needs to be handled state by state. But I think some federal help would kind of move that along better for the states that are struggling.
Yeah. Well, cool. Anything else you want to add on this one before we call it a show?
I know this is going to come up again. So this is a topic we're going to talk about consistently. It's too big of a problem. It's too significant for us to not talk about it all the time. So I don't want to sound like a broken record. There's nuances to this, and we seems like every week we pull a little bit different version of the information, and we get a little bit in different nuance that we get to talk about. So it's a fascinating thing that affects us all in a very dramatic way. So we're going to continue to talk about it. And I don't think this topic's going to go away for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. It's going to be significant. And man, I hope we get some problems solved here.
Yeah, likewise. Well, thank you all for tuning in. Appreciate all the support. I mean, we continue to see our numbers grow every single week, and so it's a good sign for us that we're producing something that's of value. But as always, if there's something you want us to cover on the show, just click in the description. There's a link there for you to be able to send us a message, and we'll get that. It'll come right to me, and so I will make sure that we get some topics covered that maybe we're not covering. But otherwise, we will call it a show, and we will talk to all of you next week. Thank you.